Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to have Bernard-Henri Lévy with us once again and to welcome Natan Sharansky. And Natan Sharansky is an individual who for 9 years, as he languished in a Russian gulag under the worst conditions, it was literally the Hebrew letters of the Bible, of the Torah, and particularly the book of Psalms that kept him alive spiritually, kept his faith and a hope alive, and allowed him to realize his dreams of immigrating to Israel and starting his family there with his beloved wife, Avital. And everyone who has read the story of Natan Sharansky knows that before he was sent off to the gulags, his wife gave him a gift, and that was a little book of Psalms, a little book of Tehillim. And he said every day he would read the Psalms, and that's what gave him strength as he read the words of King David. Natan Sharansky carries this little Tehillim that his wife gave him, that sustained him for 9 years, in his pocket next to his heart wherever he goes. And when I saw him upstairs, I said to him, "Do you have your Tehillim?" And sure enough, he pulled it out of his breast pocket. And I asked him if I could borrow the Tehillim, which I'm privileged to hold in my hand now, a very old Tehillim. And he says I should be careful, which I will be. And I want to begin tonight because our brothers and sisters are still sitting in captivity. Just like Natan Sharansky sat as a hostage of the Russian government, held against his will as a captive for 9 years, our brothers and sisters have been sitting languishing in the hell of Gaza, in the tunnels for 15 months. And so what better way than to use this Tehillim that brought about his freedom to pray for the freedom of all of our hostages to come home, especially after we saw their condition on Saturday night. We know that there's no more time. They must all come home now. So I'm going to read Psalm 121 from this sacred book of Tehillim that Natan loaned me for just a moment and then translated into English. Psalm 121. Shir lamalot esa inay alarim me'ayin yavo Ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai osei shemayim va'aretz. Al yitei lamot raglacha al yonum shomrecha. Hine lo yonum velo yishan shomer Yisrael. Adonai shomrecha, Adonai tzilcha, ayad yeminecha. Yom amashemesh leyakeka, v'yareach baloila. Adonai yishmarcha mikol ra, yishmor et nafshecha. Adonai yishmor tzeischa voecha, me'ata v'yad olam. A song of ascents, I raise my eyes to the mountains, from where will my help come? My help comes from Almighty God, Hashem, maker of heaven and earth. He will not allow your foot to falter, your guardian will not slumber. Behold, he neither slumbers nor sleeps, the guardian of Israel. Hashem is your guardian, Hashem is your shade at your right side. By day the sun will not harm you, nor the moon by night. Hashem will protect you from all evil. He will guard your soul. Hashem will guard your coming and going, for now and for all of eternity. And let us respond, Amen. Ladies and gentlemen, we are truly grateful to Paul and Karen Lévy for bringing us these extraordinary speakers, the honor and the privilege for all of us to meet modern-day Jewish heroes in our midst. I would like to call upon the founder of the Lévy Forum, Paul Lévy.
Thank you all for coming. I was especially anxious about even these brief introductory remarks tonight. So many of us, and that includes me, talk a lot, but we do less. We have tonight 2 people who do a lot. They may talk a lot, they may write a lot, but they do a lot. And it's truly a humbling experience for me to welcome them here. I admired Monsieur Lévy. It's fun to say my name in French. I admired from a distance Monsieur Lévy, and up close is even better. So we've gotten to know each other since he came here last. I do not know Mr. Sharansky, and of course, I'm delighted to welcome him. I have admired you for a long time from afar, and appreciate your making the trip. And with that, I'll turn it over to everybody.
Good evening. The title of this program is Israel and Ukraine, the Fight for Civilization. We are going to hear tonight about the front lines of that battle for civilization. It's the third program of the third season of the Lévy Forum for Open Discourse. Paul and Karen, thank you for this gift of this program tonight. It will be recorded in a video that will be sent all over the country. It will have reverberations for quite some time to come. It's a gift to Palm Beach Synagogue, to the community, and to the nation. Rabbi Shiner, Rabbi Minsky, thank you. You are the most gracious of hosts. It's always wonderful to be here. And thank you, Emily J., Claire Doyle, Tracy Pang, my colleagues, for tireless work, attending to every detail, along with Larissa Ruthman and Emily Hamilton, who make these programs go so smoothly. Tonight, we're going to hear from two heroes of the struggle for civilization. None I can name have put more heart and mind into this struggle. They will tell us what is at stake for Am Yisrael, for Eretz Yisrael, and for the nation and for the world. Natan Sharansky, we are so honored that you have come from Yerushalayim to be with us. As I think everyone here knows, 9 years a prisoner of Zion in the most brutal Soviet imprisonment. He brought attention to the world, to the reality of Soviet repression. He broke the floodgates that would ultimately bring 1 million Jews to Israel from the former Soviet Union. And his service to Am Yisrael did not stop there. 4 ministry positions, Israel's deputy prime minister. The service continues, tireless work to combat world anti-Semitism. He's a winner of the Congressional Gold Medal and the Presidential Medal of Freedom, author of 4 books and many, many editorials and essays. And with us tonight, again, with great joy, I say we have philosopher, humanitarian, thought leader, Bernard-Henri Lévy, author of 49 books. His contributions to civilization in the best sense of the word make it such a joy to have you with us again. On your seats are essays, just a small selection from our 2 distinguished guests, along with the report of the campus tour of American universities and Canadian universities that Monsieur Lévy executed, 14 of them in the space of 11 days. Tireless work. Both of our speakers have perceived the urgency of correcting the perverse anti-Israel and anti-Semitic indoctrination in higher education, the doublethink, to use the term that Natan Sharansky uses in his book, and the self-censorship of our own Jewish students, already manifest. Over 20 years ago, Natan Sharansky reported to Ariel Sharon that American campuses had become the most important battlefield outside of Israel for the future of the Jewish people. That is on the front lines of the battle for civilization. So another thank you. The organization I lead, the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, with the guidance and the support, the generous support of Paul Lévy, a member of our board of directors, launched its Campus Religious Freedom Project this fall. Partnering with Emily Hamilton, who's here with us tonight, we put Bernard-Henri Lévy's book, Israel Alone, which we'll talk about this evening, into the hands of thousands of college students. And then, as I just mentioned, a tour of 14 campuses to push back against toxic anti-Semitism. I thank all those here tonight whose donations have funded this kind of work as we continue the Campus Religious Freedom Project. I particularly want to acknowledge, once again, with great gratitude, Charles and Rita Bronfman, Alan and Leslie Schuch, Roger and Susan Hertog, Bill Hyman and Wendy Dietz, David and Simone Levinson, Saul and Georgette Boussaï, Bruce and Susie Kovner, Paul Singer and Terry Cassell, and particularly Paul Lévy, who organized this initiative. David Windreich, forgive me, there you are. The Campus Religious Freedom Project is a large ongoing project, and we ask those here tonight, according to your means, to help us continue and to grow it. I used the word heroes a moment ago. Bernard and Natan are truly heroes. Under relentless psychological and physical pressure, Natan refused to bend to the will of the KGB. Bernard has rushed into the most dangerous places on earth, sometimes right on the lines of live fire from the Russians, on the front lines of Ukraine. Danger and despots do not stand in the way of these men. We are privileged to have them with us tonight, to hear their thoughts and their reflections. So let me welcome Natan Sharansky and Bernard-Henri Lévy. It is my intention to say as little as possible tonight with this distinguished company, but I would like to begin our conversation with just that topic, the fight for civilization, Israel and Ukraine. We know the imperative of protecting these two countries, but I want to think a little bit more widely beyond that. What does it mean for the defense of democracy, for freedom, for the world? And with that, let me first turn to Natan. Or shall I turn first to...
He's taller.
It's okay. Bernard, then let me reverse the order and let's talk about Ukraine, why this struggle is so absolutely important. And then I want to move to the question, how do we win? What does victory look like? And why is victory the only way that we can proceed?
Why is it so important? First of all, because Ukrainians fight against an autocrat who is a self-declared enemy of the West, of America, and of Europe. Putin self-declared, I mean that his program, his creed is based on an explicit hatred of all the values which we share in this beautiful synagogue. So only for this reason, Ukraine is a front line of the battle for civilization. There is another reason, which is that Ukrainians, on the other side, cherish, embrace, share our values. As much as Putin is against, the Ukrainians are in favor. And as Michael said, as my dear friends Karen and Paul Lévy know, I am an eyewitness of that. I spent a lot of the last 3 years on the ground in Ukraine, shooting some documentaries, sharing the life of soldiers, resistance, and so on. And I saw that with my eyes and heard that with my ears. When I asked to these brave soldiers, why do they combat? Their reply is always, I heard that dozens, if not hundreds of times. We combat, of course, first, in order to defend our land and our family, but they always add, we combat in order to defend you. You French, you Europeans, you Westerners. We combat because we defend something which is higher than us all, which is the idea of democracy, the idea of liberal values, the idea of citizenship, and the idea of democratic civilization. So it is, for me, crystal clear, and it is not. There are not so many circumstances in the world where it is so clear. Very often, as Michael said, I covered a lot of wars in my life. I'm a philosopher, but also a war reporter. In many cases, it was gray situations. There was one who was better than the other, but nevertheless, it was gray. I know two situations today in the geopolitics of our moment when it is not gray, where it is, I'm sorry to say it, but black and white, even if the white is never completely white, of course, but black and white. One situation is Israel facing the Iranian octopus and all his proxies, starting with Hamas. It's clear, no way, no discussion, no negotiation possible with the truth. I suppose we will speak of that. And the other situation where the other place in the world where there is no possibility to have a gray heart, let's say, it is Ukraine. And it is so evident when you look at that from the ground. So what would win means?
Let me hold that one for a moment, if I may, and let's turn to Eretz Yisrael, if I may.
Okay, but I want to add a couple of words to what Bernard just now said. I have to say, first of all, the history of Jews in Ukraine and in Russia is equally tragic. We have a lot of very tragic and painful things. And as the one who grew Soviet Union in Ukraine, I can say there was a lot of Ukrainian, Russian, and Soviet, especially Soviet anti-Semitism. But important thing is what happened to this anti-Semitism in the years of independence. And I can say also from my personal experience meeting practically with all the leaders of Ukraine in the last 25 years, Ukraine made tremendous efforts to overcome these difficult periods, tremendous efforts. Now, Russia also, by the way, you have to understand, the leader of Russia is not anti-Semite. Maybe for the first time, it's strange to say, he is a war criminal, he is an awful KGB person, he is not anti-Semite, it so happened in his life. But the world which he tries to create is very bad for Jews, for everybody. And I can say in the first years that I met him in his first years of his presidency, when he was very busy to make sure that he'll be president forever, he was not concerned about empire. He was concerned about how to force the West to accept me as a superpower. But some years later, he decided why he is interested in Merkel and Bush. They're all coming and leaving, but I'm forever. He made sure that he will be there forever. And then his aim became forever how to rebuild Russian empire. And here really became a danger for the free world because he wants to change all the rules of coexistence in Europe, which was established after Helsinki Agreement, the other that you're not changing borders by force. And if he'll succeed, he'll be really it will be very dangerous for the free world. And here I come to Israel. Of course, the war in Israel is much more closer to our hearts. I have to say I was very involved in the war between Russia and Ukraine, but my interest, it didn't change, but it's full, our life is fully concentrated on what's happening with us in Israel. But that is no less the war for the future of the world in Ukraine. Here we are facing the terrorists who succeed to blackmail, and sometimes very successfully, all the world, definitely Europe. And we simply cannot afford to permit ourselves to be blackmailed because it means for us our survival. But we are blackmailed, and we proclaimed immediately that after this terrible failure of the 7th of October, that Hamas cannot continue to exist as a political and military force in Gaza, and that definitely remains our aim. But in addition, we cannot accept that our hostages will be there. And that's what makes a very painful choice for this at this moment for our people.
I want to come back to those issues. How do we deal with an enemy that has no respect for life when we do have great respect for life? But let's turn back to the question. I apologize for interrupting. What does victory look like in Ukraine? How do we get there? What are the obligations of this nation, of NATO? What's the path forward?
What victory means for Ukraine is the same as what victory means for Israel. It's very clear again. It means capitulation of the enemy. In Israel, it is clear. There is no possible compromise, no possible negotiation with Hamas and, as far as I think, with Iran. Same for Ukraine, no possibility. Any negotiation which would give to Russia even a part of its imperialist ambition will be a defeat for the West. I would like to add one word about what Natan Sharansky just said about Ukraine regarding Israel and Ukraine regarding anti-Semitism. Ukraine and Russia start from the same point, that's sure. Soviet Union, and systemic anti-Semitism, the story of refusenik starting with you. I remember one of my first public activism in my life when my voice began to be heard in Europe was to support, to plead for Natan Sharansky, who was one of the heroes of my life. And I remember, by the way, my joy and my fulfillment, a lot of things when he was liberated. But the difference between Russia and Ukraine is that Ukraine did the job and Russia did not do it. And I would just like to give one example of it. One very recent example. October 7. The difference between Russia and Ukraine about October 7 is that before October 7, as far as Russia is concerned, Russia knew. We have documentation of that. So there were some meetings in Lebanon preparing October 7 with Hezbollah, Iran, where some Russians officials attended. And after October 7, Russia and Putin were the first great country to host, receive with red carpet the Hamas leadership. Few weeks after October 7, Moscow received, hosted, cheered the Hamas. This is for Russia. Ukraine on the other side, President Zelensky, who is a Jew, as you know, belonging to a family with Holocaust victims and Holocaust survivors, President Zelensky was one of the first leaders of the world to support Israel, to say how despicable and unforgivable, and there was no excuse about Hamas and all those who support Hamas and so on and so on, offering his help to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and so on. So, on one side, supporting October 7, and on the other side, Ukraine endorsing the Israeli cause and considering Hamas and all the affiliates and the head of the octopus as a national enemy for Ukraine. So this is, for me, my footnote to what my dear Natan Sharansky just said.
And actually, I do want to even dig in a little bit deeper. if I hear you both correctly, these two struggles converge. They are not separate. They are so linked that one cannot say, well, we will just take care of Israel. We will just take care of Ukraine. We need a victory in both places. Let me just dig in a little bit more deeply there, Bernard. Victory has to be a complete victory, presumably also Crimea. What will it take from the West that we are not providing to make this happen?
It would be, the two are linked in so many aspects. And one of them is that Iran and Putin and Russia are allied, official allies. The main supporter of Iran today in the international stage is Russia. The main provider of drones for Russia is Iran. So there is an ironclad alliance between the two. We must be very aware of that. At the beginning of the war in Ukraine, 3 years ago, there were some officials in Israel who did not see that very clearly. It was a political mistake. The support of Russia to Iran and of Iran to Russia, the axis between them and with China, and between the three and with a member of NATO who is Turkey, and the link of the four with radical Islam of Sunni obedience is one of the datas of our time. In the general map of the world, which is our world, since some years and alas, for some years coming ahead, in this general map, you have an alliance between those five: China, Turkey, Iran, Russia, and countries like Qatar, like Afghanistan of Taliban, and so on. That's why, my dear Paul, it's a battle for civilization. That's why you are right, I think, to brand this series of conference as a battle of freedom and of civilization against a global enemy. We are not in local wars, We are not in a. And again, I covered some forgotten wars in my life, and it is a duty to cover them and to tell about them and to be a witness, and it's especially a duty for a Jew. But in this case, it is absolutely the key, this axis of the five, and our resistance to this axis is really an emergency and a duty for all our generations here represented.
I'm going to give a quick shout out to your book, The Empire and the Five Kings. This is an essential guide to where we are. But let me turn now, Natan. What is victory? What do we need to happen? At what point could we agree to some kind of settlement, if at all? What would it look like? And then I do want to talk more about how we deal with hostages when we're dealing with an enemy that is willing to use the biblical phrase, make its own children walk through the fire to Moloch.
Okay. First of all, because we all feel some kind of, almost I would say, depression after the 7th of October, it's very important to remind ourselves that it was the year 16 months now, when we went from unbelievable failure in our history to the situation strategically, when we are better than practically in any moment that I remember. Maybe we are almost in such a good situation that we were not since 1967. And I'll explain why. We lived in all the last years with the feeling that there is Hezbollah, and the moment we start to war with them, there'll be tens of thousands of our citizens. That's the opinion of our leading professional military and politicians. Namely, that the moment we start fighting with Hezbollah, we have to be ready to have tens of thousands of victims because of their missiles, which will cover all our cities. And of course, we had Hamas, our traditional enemy. We couldn't imagine that they have 600, 700 kilometers of tunnels, but we knew that it's serious. And above all this, there was Iran, which was the base of all this. And for 20 years, definitely for the last 15 years, Israeli government wants to attack them, but feels that it cannot, that it's too dangerous. That was the feeling before. After this situation, Hezbollah, which was preparing for at least 20 years, probably more, their grand battle, in military terms, practically doesn't exist. Syrian regime doesn't exist. Gaza, we know what's now happened with Gaza. That even President of the United States proposed that that's a property which nobody needs, let's take it. And maybe the most important thing, we wanted and we were afraid to attack Iran. We are not afraid anymore. We are waiting for the right moment, political right moment. We are not afraid anymore of Iran because all its Russian air defense, all of it, which we so frightened ourselves. That is, by the way, one of the reasons why we are afraid to irritate Putin, because of the the system of this against our airplanes in Syria. Russian system can paralyze us in attacks on Iranian bases, and we took care of this system. And in few hours, it doesn't exist anymore, and we know that we can do it. And more than this, that the Middle East knows. We restored our station of the superpower when we are not afraid anymore, and everybody afraid of us. And of course, it was awful failure. We still didn't make all the right conclusions from that awful failure on military and political level. But more than in 1 year, we changed fully strategic situation. And of course, it is clear for us that Hamas cannot exist as a political power, military power in Gaza. I would say it simply, even if we'll get all our hostages out and Hamas will be the ruling, our people will not go back to kibbutzim. It's impossible to live in the south having Hamas, and we know now very well what they are ready to do, commit suicide, but kill, rape, murder in the most awful ways, all of us. So we will not accept it. And at the same time, it's like our highest obligation. I will not speak about feelings, but that's what Israel is existing about, to save our people who are captured. So the real negotiations, it's difficult to say that it's negotiations, that we want to mobilize all our allies and our problematic partners like Qatar to convince Hamas that there is no way that they will continue ruling in Gaza. And of course, we always can do it in a military way, but we prefer to do it by having our hostages back. And that's all the game. Whether they'll agree with our conditions, well, I'm not negotiating thing, but our conditions are clear, that other day after should be disarmed, and they can go to Qatar or any other place. We will permit them to go, but Hamas will not say other. That's what we are trying now to convince. Whether we'll succeed or whether the world will succeed to convince them, or we will have to go back to fight, that's what we'll see in the days to come.
We've seen the horrible spectacle of the hostages subjected to humiliation even as they're being released in front of cheering crowds. This, of course, sends a signal that the utter eradication of Hamas, or at least its complete neutralization, is a imperative, which is something that you wrote about, Bernard. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, these scenes of humiliation, cruelty, and torture, because it is torture till the last minute. What we saw last Saturday was a pure and mere scene of torture. These three men going out of the caves, which were not the caves of Plateau, which were caves of hell, unable to see the light of the sun. One of them having to bear some black spectacles. The way in which they were obliged to recite a text prepared in advance. The way in which one had to ask to say that he was eager, that he was impatient to see his wife and daughters. He was asked to say that, and those who asked knew that they were dead. The way in which another one was asked to resume the speech which was prepared because he forgot one sentence. All this was pure torture. And it meant two things. One thing is the very nature of Hamas. They are just barbarians, they are executioners. But the other meaning of these scenes, and that's maybe the most important point, the message, Saturday, day before yesterday, was we are still here. We are still in control. Everything is under control. We are armed. Our uniforms are perfect. We organize the thing. We create a podium. We ask the Red Cross to come and to sign a sort of absurd and childish document, a release. All of that meant that Hamas is still in charge and that the ambition is to be still in charge, militarily and politically. So, as Natan just said, and as you said before, Michael, the only possible victory is these people to be, in a way or in another, eliminated from the stage. If we leave them any chance to claim for victory, to pretend that they are still in charge, it will be a catastrophe for all the area. They will become and they will remain heroes in Gaza, outside Gaza, among the Palestinians, and beyond. And what I know, again by experience, is that the only way to pick the bubble, to deflate the bubble of the aura which they have in the Muslim and Arab world, the only way to destroy the balloon is to inflict them a total, undebated defeat. And this is what I remember in 2015 and 16, at the peak of ISIS, when ISIS were at the summit of its influence in the Arabic world, a lot of people said, okay, but what can you do? You cannot destroy an ID, blah, 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 blah. You cannot destroy an ID. Like today for Hamas, people say you cannot destroy an ID. The reality is that the ID was partly destroyed in 2016 because they were clearly defeated on the ground, because their caliphate, which went from Syria to Iraq, was broken, and that there was no discussion. And I know that I was there. I shot a movie called The Battle of Mosul. I bear witness for that. I was with the Iraqi soldiers and the Kurdish soldiers, and the key was the total defeat. So, for the little caliphate of Gaza and for the big caliphate of Iran, it is the same. The idea will be maybe not killed, but really weakened, really deflated, if by exile to Qatar or anywhere, or by military battle, if they are really evacuated from the stage. This is what victory means.
I want to return, Natan, to a concept that you were advancing, pikuach nefesh. It's ingrained in us to save lives. And there is going to be a calculus, undoubtedly, between the freeing of the hostages and the number of IDF troops that will have to be there, perhaps the resumption of bombing. I'd love to get your thoughts. I realize this is complex. There's not an easy answer.
Well, look, in the past, when I was in the government, I was always voting and against all these deals when we were releasing hundreds and hundreds of terrorists with the blood on their hands in exchange for our soldiers, or sometimes in exchange for the bodies of our soldiers. And there was one night when Ariel Sharon called me. He rarely called before voting at night, but he called that tomorrow we'll be discussing about to release some drug seller from Israel who went to Lebanon, and 3 of our bodies, we are going to release 600 terrorists and 60 of them with the blood on their hands. And that because you were in prison, so you understand what it is when people are in prison, I want you tomorrow to vote with me, because he knew that I'm against. And I said, just because I was in prison. And they knew that not for every price you should be released. And when they proposed me to be released for the price which I believed is unacceptable, I refused and spent another 3 years in prison. So just because of this, I think what you are doing tomorrow, it's a huge mistake. You will pay a big price and I'm against. So that was and is my position. And of course, when Shalit, I wasn't on the government, but I was absolutely against. And then we released Sinbar and all those 1,000 people we released for 1 hour soldier. So I believe it's wrong. Having said all this, I think here is a very difficult moral case, because we are guilty. We as a state are guilty that these people were kidnapped, that hijacked, that for 8 hours our army was not there. So it's huge failure of the idea of Israel with, of course, a kind of deal that it has with the citizens, with Jews of all the world, and we were not there. So we have to do everything. We are obliged to do everything. At the same time, that's exactly our weakness, which our enemies are using. Just a few hours ago, it was declared that Hamas is postponing the deal because whatever. And why they're doing it? Because they know that immediately there will be pressure on our prime minister. Don't try to use it to have. Or, as it was just reported a few days ago, there are cases already where terrorists are calling to the families of the hijacked, kidnapped people and say, we don't see you joining the protests against the government. We don't see you fighting to defeat this government. You will never see your son. So you understand the thing is that they're not even masking that. They understand that they can mobilize our people against ourselves, and that will be part of this pressure. So I want you simply to understand what a difficult station our government, all of us, but especially our leaders are. And still, I was saying that we have to do everything to bring back our hostages, but we cannot accept the principle that Hamas will stay at power. And that's why we don't have any other formula but to keep saying that we are going to reach all the aims of the war, meaning that victory over Hamas, release of the hostages, and de-radicalization. Other cannot be the same type of regime which it was before. How we will do it at the end, nobody knows, because the situation is changing practically every few hours. But if we will continue showing that our humanism and our feeling of solidarity can be used all the time against us, as they see now, we will not be able to reach all our aims. So we really have to be able to say that there are limits to which we are ready to make concessions.
Thank you for that. And we should take up in more detail the question of Iran. We have in this country, of course, highly divided opinions about how we deal with Iran. Last year we had John Bolton here, who, of course, advocated a very muscular response to the Iranian situation. And now the Israelis, as you said, Natan, have shown their weakness. Is this the moment?
Right. Now Israel showed weakness. Now
Israel showed the weakness of Iran.
We showed the weakness of Iran. Yeah. Okay. But,
No. The opposite.
Yeah. Well, if you're asking me, I'll tell you very briefly because the Bernard has a lot to say about it. There are three ways to deal with Iran. And by the way, here we have to give credit to Bibi Netanyahu. He was the first, and I can say it, I was in his first government 26 years ago. He started speaking about the Iran as number one threat. Then nobody was understanding why it is so important. When he was Minister of Finance in Israel, he, through Ron Dermer, whom he appointed financial attaché in Washington, organized the first sanctions of America against Iran. So he was doing it for many years. And then in 2011, but he decided that we will attack Iran. And then our military and others said, well, we cannot do it. And so from this point, now we know we can do. But I believe there are three ways. Or economical sanctions, which tried, don't work. President Trump believes it can work. We'll see, I don't think. Or military solution. I think now Israel feels more confident that we can do it. Of course, with the help of, at least with the passive assistance of America, which still has to give some weapons for us, but we can do it. And the third, which unfortunately for many years I was the lone voice about it, now some people think differently. The first is the regime change. Iran, from all the Muslim countries, it has the most broad opposition inside. Students' organizations, women's organizations, trade unions. This nation was very ripe for revolution in 2009 when President Obama made unbelievable, I would say betrayal, but let's say a mistake, when at the moment of revolution, really, at the moment when people were on the barricade, the only thing they wanted to hear from the leader of the free world, that we are with you, that you are absolutely right. And he said, engagement with the regime is more important than changing of the regime. He liked this word, engagement. I then called to his advisor on democracy, whom later he sent ambassador to Moscow, and said, I believe it is the biggest betrayal of the free world after Munich. How he could say it? And the answer was that, well, we see our specialists, said that it will be very dangerous for the democratic dissidents inside Iran, and that's why it is important that America will not say any words of support. By the way, it's opposite to position of Iranian dissidents themselves. So I want to say, if we will not make the same mistake again, and if we'll be willing to support more strongly dissidents, and it seems to me that now there are more voices who are ready to support them, then maybe there will be regime change, because after all, it's the Iranians, it's not kind of primitive terrorists who only now appeared in the history. It's the ancient people with the ancient culture, with a lot of mutual things. But Iranian regime, fundamentalist regime, which is dangerous because if, let's say, for Russia, their destruction, mutual destruction, is a threat because they don't believe in the next world. Russians want to survive this world. For Iranians, mutual destruction is not a threat. And so it's a very dangerous regime. Okay.
Thank you for that. Bernard, I know you have some strong thoughts about this one.
My thoughts are very close to the thoughts of Natan. I really believe that between Israel and Iran, or between the West and Iran, it is an existential struggle. No doubt about that. Not only for political reasons, also for deep metaphysical reasons. You have to know that when the Islamic Republic took birth, it took birth with two backgrounds. First, radical Islam, of course, Shia radical Islam. The other one was an ideology which was explicitly based on de-Westernization, hate of the West, and hatred and will to destroy Israel. It was the two. In 1979, I am old enough to remember very well of that, the two springs of the regime were radical Islam and hate of Israel. Not hate of Israel as the consequence of the first one, but as a distinct source. So it's really an existential fight. You have inside the regime of the Ayatollah, you have some of them who sincerely believe, for example, that it's a duty to enlarge the streets, the avenues of Tehran, because Israel will soon be destroyed, and that the hidden imam, the last imam, the hidden imam, because of the death of Israel, will come back, and that they have to prepare a sort of airstrip for the arrival of the hidden imam coming to celebrate the death of Israel. This is the background, this is the spin, the bone of the Iranian ideology today. So in front of that, again, I'm not a man of... I'm an intellectual. I'm a man of peace. I love peace. I long for and I starve for mutual understanding between civilizations, of course. And I wait for the victory of those dissidents of our time, who are the Iranian women and the civil society in Iran. But if this victory does not come, if the regime change does not happen, I believe too that the worst solution has been and would be and could be a deal, an artistic deal with Iran. The temptation has existed, still exists in Europe and in America, and I really believe that it will be a tragic mistake. And I think that you have in America, we have in Europe, many signs well documented that on this story, it is 5 minutes to midnight. We are not 1 hour to midnight. We are not years, maybe not even a lot of months before the possibility for Iran to really assemble devices and throw them. So, alas, it's terrible to say that. But for the first time in my life, if the brave Iranian women does not succeed, if the brave dissidents do not win their perestroika, there will be no other solution than a preemptive attack on the nuclear facilities of Iran. It is crucial for Israel and crucial for the West. And again, I hate to say that because I know that we open a Pandora box for sure. But if we don't do it, we don't open a Pandora box, we open the gates of hell for all of us, Jews and non-Jews.
Natan, I would invite you to talk a little bit about the two-state solution. As late as 2020, you were not optimistic, but you still favored the idea of the creation of Palestinian civil society. And of course, we're now dealing once again with the irrational.
I can tell it like this. In 1993, there was Oslo Agreement. And I wrote my first article against Oslo 2 weeks after this. And the idea of my article was that our leaders, in fact, now are bringing dictator from Tunis to Ramallah, and are saying that because he is such a strong dictator, he can deliver us peace, because he is without Supreme Court, human rights organization, and so on. And in order to make sure that he will be our dictator, we'll give him a lot of money. And as a result, we are bringing the person who will make sure that the next generation of Palestinians will hate us more, because that's the only way for dictator to survive. And that our aim must be to encourage civil society and Palestinians. And then Yossi Beilin, who was then deputy foreign minister, said, Natan, it's a great idea, but you understand your idea will mean that for 30 years we'll have no peace until there'll be new generation. And we are going to have absolute peace in 5 years. It's new Middle East. So 30 years passed and then. And today I'll say, I still believe that the only way to bring real peace is civil society, but today 30 years will not be enough. We'll need at least 2 generations. So let's, with two-state solutions, wait for 50 years. In the meantime, whenever we can, let's try to build peace, not on another dictator who will be ours, but let's try to support beginnings of civil society. And then when the new generation of Palestinians will be, let's speak about it. I have to say that even, let's say, now people who are to the left from me and who believed more strongly than I that there should be Palestinian state, I think nobody can dare even to think about independent Palestinian state after what happened on the 7th of October. And the fact that the free world continues to speak about the only two-state solution, that there is nothing else, as if nothing happened. That goes very well with the book of Bernard-Henri Lévy about the loneliness of Israel. I have to say that all those problems that Bernard mentioned, that we had ISIS and we defeated it. In the case of ISIS and the others, it was clear that all the free world, they are their enemies. The fact that we can have it today, this international court, which with such absurdity, and the leading European countries who agree that this court is wrong, are playing under this game, and that today our prime minister cannot go straight from America to Israel, but the airplane has to go in order not to cross the skies of Canada. That means on which side the free world is when they're speaking about two-state solutions.
Thank you for that clarity. This is important. Bernard, anything that you wanted to add to that?
Two-state solution means a Palestinian state, okay? For a Palestinian state to exist, there are two preconditions, one regarding the Palestinians and one regarding Israel. Regarding the Palestinians, the precondition is that the Palestinians want it, wish a Palestinian state, which is not the case, has not been the case, has never been the case since 1948. The Palestinian cause, the Palestinian nationalism, is based on the idea of certainly not a Palestinian state, at least at the side of Israel, but even a Palestinian state. I never saw in my life a national movement caring so little about its victory. That's the first point. And today, more than ever, the target, the focus of either Hamas or PLO is less than ever to reach and to get a Palestinian state. The second condition regarding Israel for a Palestinian state, and this could be understood, and we should say and repeat that to all our friends and neighbors who are not Jews, the condition for a Palestinian state is that not only it recognizes the existence of Israel, of course, this is the minimum. Minimum room is to recognize the existence of your neighbor. But for a Palestinian state to be envisioned, it needs to not only recognize, but embrace, accept with full heart, feel, receive as a blessing the neighborhood with the Jewish state. Honestly, for any part of the world, this is the law. Not only you recognize from far, but you think that it is a source of prosperity, that you can bridge bridges, that it can make the humanity progress, and so on. So, again, the least to say is that this is not the case. Therefore, to be concrete, we don't know what will happen in 20 years, 10 years, even 5 years. History has more imagination than manhood. History has a lot of imagination. We saw such in Soviet Union in 1989, in many places of the world, we saw U-turns in humanity which are really spectacular. But if there is one moment since all my remembrance where a two-state solution cannot even be not only envisioned, but it makes me feel bad even to mention it. If there is one moment where a two-state solution cannot be envisioned, it is today. It is today. As long as the Hamas will be in charge, as long as the Hamas will be popular, as long that in West Bank there would be some Palestinian PLO people who believe that the Hamas might have been right and they are heroes of the Arab world, as long as this exists, no country in the world could stand the idea of a state of this sort at his neighbor, and same for Israel.
Thank you. I want to go to a point that we talked about earlier. You've both discussed in your writings the American campus, where we had the appalling spectacle of students cheering for Hamas, tearing down or defacing the posters of the hostages, faculties that are steeped in the idea of Israel as an apartheid state, as a genocidal state, with none to challenge them. Both of you have written about that. Talk about the way forward. This is the battleground for the future of the Jewish people. So, Natan, let me start with you. What's the way forward?
I'll tell you. I first wrote an article traveling to occupied territories, where occupied territories were American universities 20 years ago, because I didn't think that it will be literally occupied. But then, during my tour in 2003 over American universities, I was shocked for the first time by the fact that there are more and more Jewish students who are afraid to speak on behalf of Israel because it will be bad for their careers. And when I saw it happening in Harvard Business School and not in Moscow in my days, when one postdoctorate student says to me that she wanted very much to sign a letter against this investment in support of Israel, but 3 professors who are very important for her career will not like it. And I saw it again and again in many universities, and then I understood that all the centers for Middle East studies and so on are becoming more and more dangerous. And what happened 20 years later, of course, it was a result of the long history of brainwashing of the so-called, then there was no woke movement, but all this progressive, anti-colonial, anti-genocide attitude toward Israel was developed. But as I said, in the beginning, it started from the fact that Jewish students started being afraid. And if you say about forward, not mentioning all the big battles which were, and Bernard was just now in many universities can describe. And by the way, since the war started, I was already 8 times in America on these battlefields. So I have to say, now, and the situation was absolutely awful. After on this 8th of October, even I couldn't imagine the situation would be as bad and so on. But the hope is that when Jewish students stop being afraid, and we have first signs very good, like in May there was a letter of 500 students in Columbia University, and Columbia is the hotbed. I was twice in these days, probably more than I, but we know what it is. 500 students with their names, with their faculty, where they can be found, wrote a letter saying that we are Jewish, Zionism is part of our identity, and we demand from the administration and American administration in Washington to protect us under American law in our identity. And then I said that can be a turning point. If there'll be 1,000 students, now they have already 1,000 students who signed it. Another fact from recent weeks, from recent months, is in Harvard. Harvard students, Jewish students, had some organization, went to the court and accusing administration of antisemitism, that they're not protecting Jewish students. The Harvard administration appealed to the court, dismissed it because it's nonsense. The court refused to dismiss. They said there are enough evidence, 77 pages of evidences, that we have to study them. And then the Harvard administration, afraid also, it was really in the days when Trump was coming to power. They signed an agreement, not with all the students, some students refused to sign, but with the organizations, by which, in order to avoid the court, by which they first of all, accept that they accept international definition of anti-Semitism. What means that they accept that anti-Zionism also can be stopped as anti-Semitism. And they understand that for many students at Harvard, Zionism is their identity, and they have to protect them and their identity. So it's small victories, but if to think where this administration was only a few months ago, when they were not ready to say publicly that genocide against Jews is a crime, and where they today, it happens only when Jewish students are not afraid to speak. And then there is an American system of court of hearings in Congress which help them. So that's what makes me hopeful. Otherwise, the situation is awful. Yeah.
Thank you. And of course, Bernard, you saw some signs of hope visiting American campuses, as well as signs of serious dysfunction.
Serious dysfunction, to say the least, yes. And these anti-Zionist movements, occupations, or riots in the universities are not only anti-Zionist; they are clearly anti-Semitic. And I saw that, as you mentioned, thanks to Paul Lévy and to a group of his friends. I undertook a whole tour of 14 campuses from coast to coast and from north to south. So I have a little idea of what's happening there. And it is not progressist values. It is the values which are embraced by those groups and rioters are pure fascist values. It is a fascist combat. The ideology which is there is a fascist and sometimes Nazi ideology. That's the element of sadness and of despair. The sign of confidence and of hope is that in front of that, the students, and again, from UCLA to Columbia, from Ohio to Toronto and so on, the students, the Jewish students, are afraid and brave, are shy and proud, and more proud. This, for me, was a discovery. Of course, they were physically harassed. Of course, there are some moments when they are alone, where they cannot put their kippah on the head. But I spoke in some audiences like this one, with mixed audience, Jews and non-Jews, and sometimes some rioters, some fascists in the audience. And the Jewish students, even when they were a minority, they stood firm. They did not leave the ground. They did not leave the battlefield to those neo-Nazis. So this, for me, is an element of thought. And what I tried the message which I tried to convey, and which was, I think, which found a real echo among the Jewish students and the non-Jewish students, was the following. If you are a real anti-colonialist, then you have to remember that Israel was stemmed out of an anti-colonial fight against the British and against the Nazi Germany. If you are anti-genocide, if you really believe in that, you have to be aware that there is one project of genocide today in the area and beyond. It is the genocide, the dream of genociding, the dream of killing all the Jews in the head of the Islamist, of the radical Islamist. There is no thought, no attempt, no dream of genocide on Israeli side. Of course, where did you see someone wanting genocide and offering, bringing some trucks loaded with goods, maybe not enough, but bringing the trucks and the lorries. When did you see a genocide when the supposed actor of genocide takes some ill children and bring them to Emirates in order to be cured from a rare disease and so on? But on the other side, if you listen to Iran, if you listen to Hamas, if you listen to Hezbollah or to Houthi, if you listen to those who dream of a Palestine free or from the river to the sea, it is a project, a genocidal project. So what I said to all these students was, in the name of the anti-genocide thought, you should endorse, you should embrace, you should support Israel. And about apartheid, again, in this area, if there are places where apartheid was implemented and achieved, it is your Arab countries at the beginning of Israel. All Jews were, as you know, kicked out of most of Arab countries. Israel, you can have discussion about Israel, but it is probably the democratic country where you have a minority of Muslims inside the border of Israel, which counts 20% of the population, and which has, of course, all civil rights, but which is certainly better integrated in the Israeli society than, for example, the Muslims in my society in France. So if there is one case of an anti-apartheid fight, which succeeded, which is implemented on the ground, it is Israel. So my plea in those campuses was, if you are anti-genocide, if you are anti-apartheid, if you are anti-colonialism, then you have to be a supporter of Israel. And I can tell you, this message was received, as we say in French, 5 sur 5, 5 on 5, by a lot of students.
We may have time for a question or two, probably not, but I want to end then with a really magnificent passage that you wrote, Natan, in your review in the New York Post of Bernard's book, Israel Alone. Sometimes justice takes a long time, but it does happen. We shouldn't give up hope. Israel is alone now, but it's our job to make sure that that changes and that there is support among us and support among non-Jews for the state of Israel and its future. Thank you all for being with us.